So with all my posts oriented, I've clamped them all together. You know, there's a tiny bit of a space here, which means that these posts, or this one's a little bit out of square, but I've got them locked together in a happy place. And so I'm going to transfer my center lines across all 4 posts so that I know they're parallel with each other. And that way, when I cut my joinery and fit it all together, there won't be any twisting or joints not lining up. I'm just measuring from my corners. My posts are a hair over 4 inches. They'll probably be exactly 4 once I've sanded them down. But I make a few reference marks and then I check them with my square here. See if they're lining up with the other centers from the other posts, which they are, which is good. I'm going to flip these around, do that exact same thing on the other side. And then once I have all my squares on the other side, I'll connect the dots with a straight edge, connect all my center lines so that I have a center line on all 4 faces of each post, going from top to bottom. And then I'm going to lay my joinery for my through tenons and even my house tenons off these center lines, so that way I know everything is perfectly parallel. So I'm just using my track from my track saw as a straight edge. Just transfer those center marks down so you can see them. And you just line it up. Center line. Do that on all 4 faces of each post. And then we know our joinery is going to be money. It don't matter if you can split the line with a saw for half a mile. If the line ain't in the right spot, joinery's still going to look like crap. All right, now that I've got all my center marks on my pieces, I'm going to start to just kind of map out where my joinery is. So I know that, you know, this is the outside of my table. These legs are just going to spread apart, right? So this is the side. These are the ends of the bench. So I know at each end I got a trestle through tenon coming through. So I'll just put tenon, and then I put out. I'm not worried about the exact location right now. I just want to make sure I have all the faces correct. All right, so I'll do the same thing on the other side. And that way, obviously, the inside is the tenon goes in, tenon comes out the outside. That's how I reference it. You can label it however you want. It doesn't really matter as long as you can end up cutting it all in the right place. And then I know at the top, hereabouts, there's going to be a through tenon from my short tie piece coming through. So I just put tenon out there. Yeah, so from here I can lay out these tenons, and I know on the inside face I'm going to have a mortise for the short tie piece that's going to butt into the mortise for this through tenon. But now that I have those joints roughly laid out, I know I'm not going to screw it up because I've labeled it. Now I can take them, plot them out. Now in order to do that, I'll take these 2, and just like I did when I was laying out the centers, line them up perfectly flush. And I'm going to clamp them together. Then I'll use my square to square all these mortise layouts across both pieces, so that way I know there's no less room for human error. And from here, I know that this is my bottom. So I've got a 3-inch tenon on the bottom. So I'll mark 3 inches. Then from the shoulder of that tenon to the start of my through mortise is 5 inches. So mark 5 inches. Then I know my through mortise is 4.5 inches wide. That's the width of my tenon. And then depending, the space in between here and the top tie is going to vary depending on what you've made your bench height to be. So it's best not to measure in between, but to measure from the top down, because you know that your tie through tenon is going to be 3 inches, because the side rails of the bench are 6. The top is 3, right? So 3 inches is at the top, and the other 3 to where the bottom of the side rail is, right? So you mark 3 inches down. Now, in my case, I had to plane or joint my side rails to 5 and 15/16 just to get that last little rough bit off. I just couldn't quite get the full 6. So I'm going to adjust my measurement to 2 and 15/16. That way I know when I put my side rail of my bench notch and slide on here, there's not going to be a gap in between the top of my tenon. It's actually going to rest right on that through tenon that sticks out the sides. And then that through tenon is 4 inches. So I'll mark 4 inches. You can use a framing square. If you've got a real accurate combination square, you can use that as well. Then you just mark the top of each mortise. Actually, I'm going to go right across on all of these, just because I'm going to be transferring that line around the sides for the mortise that connects this short tie. And then you want to do this bottom shoulder all the way around at the 3-inch mark. So now we know that the top tenon comes out the side, so we don't need to mark it across the face. Don't confuse yourself by putting the line right across here. Just transfer the reference mark over and put your lines across the correct face. And then before you lay out your the width of your mortise for your through tenon, just go and double check the actual tenon, that it's perfectly 1.5 inches. Maybe you planed it down and it's a bit big or it's a bit small, but you want this to match, obviously. So check, check, double check. I know mine's 1.5 inches. So from center, I mark 3/4 to either side of the center line. And then I just connect the dots. All right, so there's your tenon. I just kind of scribble that out so that if I'm having a Space Cadet kind of day, it's pretty hard to cut on the wrong side of the line when it's highlighted. And then once you move on to the sides, we've got 1.5 inch wide tenon on the bottom as well. So you do the same technique, 3/4 of an inch to either side of center, draw your lines, transfer those around the bottom. And then the same for this tenon, you mark 1/2 inch to either side of center for this through mortise, because these tenons are 1 inch, not 1.5 inches. And once we've got all our mortises laid out, I know a lot of you guys don't have a dedicated hollow chisel mortiser like I do, So I'm going to do most of my mortising on that, but I'll show you just how to freehand it with a Forstner bit and chisel it for those of you who don't have all the fancy shop tools. And it's just as accurate. It's just obviously, it's actually even more accurate in some respects, as long as you've got a sharp chisel. Or you can do it on a drill press, drill it out with a Forstner bit. But it's just as easy on short pieces like this where you don't have to worry about, drilling, super. It's hard to drill really crooked on a piece that's not super deep, especially if you're drilling from both sides. And really, if the insides of your mortise, drift a little bit, it doesn't really matter as long as where the tenon enters the wood. On the other side, it's tight, and where it exits the wood, it's tight. You're going to have a really stiff joint. I usually always kind of pare back the insides of the mortise just to reduce friction when you're fitting the two together. Now to the inside from our through mortise, we've got this short tie coming in here. So the full width of the board is the 4.5 inches, which is the size of our tenon, but the tenon is 3/8 smaller on each end. So I've marked the width of this, and then I marked 3/8 of an inch in from each end. And my tenon's actually a hair large, so I actually just set my tenon on there and kind of split the difference to overlap each side the same. And I just trace that on directly so that I know I don't have to fiddle fart around with that when I want to put it in there. So I just trace those lines. And then I've got strong 1 inch. So I'll mark 1/2 inch to either side of center. And then just connect the dots. Scribble that in. That's that mortise. And I'll do the same thing with the top mortise just to transfer these lines right here. Bring those reference marks around. Lay out the top through mortise. Now the bottom tenon we're going to cut on the table saw. So you can lay it out, but ultimately your measurements on the table saw fence is what's going to determine the size of the tenon. But it's good to have the lines there just to make sure you did it properly. As you can see here, I've transferred this top mark for the mortise around to this side, and then I'm taking the actual tenon like I did on the other piece, line it up, trace the bottom, that way you know your tenon gonna fit. And that lines up perfect. Then you just mark your 1/2 inch to either side, connect the dots. And that's how you lay out your mortises. Exciting! Try to keep this tutorial like, happy-go-lucky kind of samurai style, but, for a large extent, the hard work of woodwork is really monotonous and kind of boring. But it's the excitement of seeing it take shape and go together, and then the euphoric, orgasmic, well, that's a bit much, but the euphoria of seeing it finished and just the relief and the joy of just knowing that you're going to have this forever and you can give it to your sons. It's so worth it. So if this tutorial's getting a bit boring, if the project's getting a bit boring, you just got to push through to the end because it's going to be worth it. Hang in there. All right, so just like we cut the other tenons on our short ties, the 3-inch tenon at the bottom of the post, I'm going to cut in the same fashion. So I measure 3 inches to the outside of the blade here. strong inch and a quarter up for the shoulder cut. And I just use the crosscut guide in combination with the fence. So this is how I cut the length of the tenon. I added a height extender, just a board clamped to my fence. And then I use the crosscut guide in combination with the fence. Just ride my piece right along there, cut that shoulder. I sprayed a little bit of Jigaloo non-staining sealant or lubricant. And you spray a bit of that on the table of your saw and a bit on your fence. Man, it's just gives you, because the end grain likes to bind on the steel a little bit and give it that kind of thing going on. It's not really fun when you're using a table saw. So if you spray a little silicone lubricant on there, you get a nice smooth action. That's how you cut the tenons. And the other little cut with a 1/4 inch relief, we can just do that freehand with a hand saw. Or if you want, you can set it up while you got the saw going. Doesn't take extra time. Of course it takes extra time. It just takes a little bit of extra time. Ain't making no sense, just talking to yourself. Okay, now I'll get to the good part. Drilling out a mortise freehand. You'll actually get just as good a results, if not even better, doing it this way, as long as you're not a schmuck with the drill. So it's pretty simple. This drill bit will probably just get me the depth I need, about 3 1/8. Drill your mortise. Well, actually, no, this is the through mortise. Never mind. So I'm going to drill from this side, as deep as I can. This is the trestle side, the inside. And then the tenon protrudes out the other face. So this is going to get covered by a shoulder. So, if you ding an edge or it's not super perfect, not a big deal. Start on this face so that you can kind of get your practice. And then once you get it figured out, I'm using a full-size 1.5 bit, just so I can do less chiseling. Forstner bits do tend to wander a little bit, depending on the grain of the wood and how hard you're pushing. And so just don't push super hard, because the harder you push, the more they'll drift. I have to rock mine a little bit back and forth just to keep it cutting, because I've sharpened it, but this is super hard wood. So we just drill these holes as deep as we can, chisel it kind of roughly square, and then we're gonna flip it over. I'll switch to my 3 3/8 bit, so I don't have to get super close to the edge on the other side. Drill till we meet the holes, and then just let the chisel do the rest. It's pretty simple. So just go at it. If you stop and you see that you're starting to drift, try and correct it as best you can. But it's not going to be too... It's not going to be that big of a deal unless you go really, really far off. But just try and keep your shaft, centered
looking plumb. And you can put a square there if you want. I don't know. I just kind of. Okay, so now I've drilled through into the mortise for the side piece here that I've kind of over mortised, which is no big deal. Okay, so now we're going to get to chiseling here. Always just want to start well inside the line. Probably do some damage here. Now if you want, you could put a little piece of wood inside this mortise here to prevent that corner from blowing out, but I think I've already blown it out, so I'm going to just chip it off. It's not going to be that big of a deal to have a little bit of a split corner on the inside there. Structurally, I think she's still going to be really strong. But some people like all the insides of their joints to be really pretty. Okay, so now that we've got it going, you basically take another 16th out. Basically, literally basically. Take another 16th off. Now be careful because the grain here is moving, right? And that'll want to pull your chisel into that grain, so you always want to kind of cut across that grain first. And strong 16th away from the end. Start to chisel down. I think you guys get the idea now. This part is a bit time consuming, but man, is it rewarding when you get that perfect fit at the end. Sometimes switching to a smaller chisel and kind of doing half the end of the mortise. It's a little easier, you don't get your chisel stuck as often. Alright, and then from here you just kind of pare it by hand if you can. If your grain's going this way, start so that you're cutting across the grain, you're not cutting into it, because your chisel will drift. Split that line. Kind of do about a half chisel width each time, so that you're following the face of the fresh cut. There we go. Just keep working your way down until it's perfect. Okay, pretty much there. You just take a straight edge and put it along each face. And I put about a 30-second kind of a concave on each face so that the wood's not getting in the way. So you just check along each face to make sure that you're touching right at each edge. If there's any high spots, just knock them down. The chisel. That leaves you a little bit of wiggle room to file. And a way to test the mortise is to take a framing square, which is 1.5 inches exactly. See if it, it's nice and tight all the way along. Maybe a little too tight, but that's good. Gives us some room to adjust. Okay, so we're pretty close. All right. So this is where the tenon's going to be coming out, the outside face. You can see that it's a little too snug right now to fit, which is what we want. So without hitting the outside edge, I just pare down the inside to make it a little bit concave. So once you know that it's got a little bit of a concave on this inside edge, I usually come with a nice sharp wood file. I'll just file up to that line. Check it. Does it look tight? Yeah, it's starting to fit there. It's actually fitting all the way along. I think the height is a little bit off. Just adjust the top here a bit. Take my line off. Now the inside works on top and bottom. So that's not causing much friction as well. The top is like 30 seconds, face to face. And then you check it with a straight edge. Like the side of I don't have my files are smooth and straight on the edge, so I just use the file to check it. Make sure there's no humps in the middle. A little bit concave from side to side. Okay, so that's nice and tight right there. This is what I want. And if you want, you can just kind of lightly file the end of your tenon, just ever so lightly. We're kind of putting pressure on the end here, so it's not filing a groove in there. So I know that that's going to fit. Lovely. Now this side I can be a little bit more liberal with the chisel. Because these edges are going to get hidden. Okay, let's try that. Right. Three more just looks pretty nice. Yeah, and so with a little fine tuning, you can just get that smooth. Now that we've got this in here fitting nice and tight, I'll just do a light line. Because the bottom edge of this tenon I'm going to round over. You can obviously leave it however you like. I'm just going to put a little bit of a radius on that, and then the bench top sits right on this edge tight.